Good morning, everybody. Brandon Schrage, Technical Service Manager with FMC here. I have you joining me in a research block just north of Bradshaw, Nebraska. Out here we do a number of insecticide, fungicide, and herbicide trials, but I noticed something this morning that I wanted to bring to your attention. You know, it's August 4th, there's a lot of planes still flying around. We're trying to get that insecticide and fungicide on, and rightly so. A lot of the conditions that we've faced the last couple of weeks have been conducive for disease pressure. When we think about our rust, we've had a lot of southern wind, we've had a lot of fluctuating temperatures, but it's been a relatively high moisture July for a good part of the plains. And so very conducive, especially for our Cercospora diseases, corn on corn systems, no-till systems. That's where we have pretty heavy inoculum. And so it pays to be diligent in making sure we're going out there and identifying these disease properly. There's a number of things going on in this field that I want to show you. The first of which being two lesions or symptomology aspects that sometimes we overlook or sometimes we think is related to disease. And so one of the first ones I want to show you is you can tell along these leaf margins that we have some very fine feeding. Some people tend to think that might be beginner gray leaf spot. In reality, what this is it's a feeding pattern from an ovipositor from a corn blotch leaf miner. And so we typically see these on the lower levels of the leaf. Insecticides don't do much as far as controlling this pest just because they're inside that plant tissue. And so unless we have a very systemic product, that's something we typically don't have to worry about. But it's very commonly misinterpreted for disease. Another one that I have here that many people often see who might think it's, you know, a northern corn leaf blight or some sort of shredding due to wind. But this right here is actually due to adult corn rootworm feeding. And so earlier in the season, you'll typically see this on the lower levels of the plant. But when we get the males first emerge out of the ground, the females maybe haven't come out yet, or perhaps we're not silking. That's what those corn rootworm adults are going to feed on for the beginning part of their adult life cycle. So the next two things that I want to show you is actually two diseases, two fungal pathogens, but in reality, they don't pose much of a yield risk. Sometimes they can be quite visual. They spook us a little bit. But reality, they're really no of great concern. One of them is Physoderma brown spot, which I'll zoom in on here in a second. And the other one is Hocus leaf spot. And so if you look through here, it may be a little hard to see on your camera, but we do have some Hocus leaf spot throughout this plot. And so when I try to find some of this, it basically stands out relatively easily. And so here's a good leaf to take. And so as I'm walking closer, you can see that these white circles, and many times they won't have any margin on them. They'll get bigger, they'll connect to others, but this is Hocus leaf spot. And traditionally, especially in Nebraska, we don't typically have a lot of yield loss from that aspect. But it's important to know to differentiate from your gray leaf spots and some of your more yield limiting diseases. Another one I want to show you is a Physoderma brown spot. And so if I kind of pick you up and we take a little bit of a walk here, you can see here along some of these leaf margins, that is usually a pretty good indication of Physoderma brown spot. It really likes to move in on the leaf midvein. You can notice that it starts to develop on the stalks and on the ears. And while this can be a quite ugly pathogen, typically it doesn't result in any form of yield loss. Now, fortunately, for our purposes today, we do have some southern rust that has blown in. Many of us recall that we did have some substantial southern winds in June and July. Our inoculation came in quite substantially. And so you can see that we've got some developing, especially on our field borders. And so this, contrary to the Physoderma, contrary to the eye spot or the Hocus, this can be yield limiting, and this is something we need to pay special attention to. And so if you can see these pustules, they're actually like a raised bump. And if you take your finger, you can rub on that and it'll produce a kind of red dust. And one of the ways that we can differentiate the southern rust from your common rust is the southern rust won't have any raised pustules on the underside of the leaf. So on the back side, this is super smooth. It's got raised pustules on the upper leaf surface. Common would have raised pustules on both sides, and typically southern rust is a little bit more dense. You know, your common rust will be a little bit more sporadic. And so that's the difference right there between your rust species. We also have out in this field some infamous northern corn leaf blight. So between northern corn leaf blight, the rusts, and gray leaf spot, these are probably your biggest yield limiting diseases. This has a kind of cigar shaped, water soaked appearance. They can be a little bit tricky to identify early on compared to gray leaf spot, but once we get some size to them, there's really no doubting how to identify northern corn leaf blight. So the one that remains, and I would say arguably the one that steals most from us when we're talking about yield loss due to diseases, is going to be gray leaf spot. And so you could pull off almost any lower leaf out here, and you're going to find a number of juvenile, or I should say early, gray leaf spot lesions. The best way and the easiest way for your average Joe to identify this particular pathogen, though, is to get lesions that are a little bit more sizable. They may seem a little bit irregular at first, but once we get in here and they start to develop and elongate, they form pretty distinctive rectangular patterns. They're sort of limited to staying within some of those leaf veins, and you can see that our severity and incidence can vary depending on our tolerance, depending on whether or not we applied a foliar fungicide or even an infuro fungicide. And so that's how you differentiate the gray leaf spot. And so basically, there's always a number of lesions out here that we can misidentify. A lot of them are caused by insects. Some of them are by bacteria and various pathogens that really have no impact on our yield. The big ones to look out for, obviously, are the gray leaf spot, the common and southern rust, and then the northern corn leaf blight. And fortunately, we have been able to find just about all those here in this corn block. And so it pays to get out there and be fairly diligent, making sure we're identifying these diseases, recording what sort of percentage of the leaf surface is covered and in what stage in the canopy. There are a number of really good fungicidal products out there for control of our various rust, our gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight. Lucento with FMC happens to be one of them. We're labeled for control for all those diseases. And one of the main things we want to do is get that product on early enough to protect that ear leaf. A lot of university data shows that if we can protect that ear leaf, some of the lower inoculum won't inhibit our yield. And so if we can get that flown on, you know, V1, or sorry, a VT, R1, R2 timing, that's where we want to be. And so if you have any questions, if you're ever curious about what sort of diseases you're seeing in your field, reach out to me or any other FMC representative and we'll be happy to help. Thank you.